Here is something most people using olive oil every day do not know. The bottle sitting on your kitchen counter, the one you pour over salad twice a week and occasionally cook with, is not being used in a way that accesses most of what makes it genuinely remarkable. Olive oil in the way most people use it is a condiment. Olive oil used consistently, at the right dose, at the right time, with the right quality, is one of the most extensively studied foods in the entire nutrition science database. And the mechanisms behind what it does inside your body go well beyond what the heart-healthy fat label on the bottle suggests. Today we are going through what the research actually says about daily olive oil consumption at a meaningful dose, the specific compounds responsible for each effect, what the most credible large-scale studies found, and the practical protocol that reflects what the science supports. There is also one quality distinction that matters enormously, and that most olive oil buyers are completely unaware of, and we will cover that specifically because without it, the rest of the information is significantly less useful. Before we get into the research, 60 seconds of chemistry is worth your time, because it makes everything that follows make immediate sense. Extra virgin olive oil is not nutritionally equivalent to other cooking oils. The difference is not primarily about the fat type, though the monounsaturated fat content is genuinely beneficial. The difference is a compound called oleocanthal. And oleocanthal is what separates real high-quality extra virgin olive oil from every other oil on the kitchen shelf. In 2005, researchers at the Monell Chemical Senses Center published a study in Nature, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in existence, identifying oleocanthal as the compound responsible for the distinctive peppery, throat-burning sensation that high-quality fresh extra virgin olive oil produces. What made this discovery significant was not the sensation itself. What made it significant was the mechanism behind it. Oleocanthal inhibits the same COX-1 and COX-2 enzymes that ibuprofen inhibits, the same biological pathway, the same anti-inflammatory action. One of the researchers made the connection because he had previously worked on liquid ibuprofen formulations and recognized the same throat-burning sensation when tasting fresh olive oil at a meal in Sicily. That observation led directly to the research that confirmed the mechanism. Approximately 50 grams of high-quality extra virgin olive oil, which is roughly 3.5 tablespoons, provides the approximate anti-inflammatory equivalent of about 10% of a standard adult ibuprofen dose. That number sounds modest until you consider three things. First, this effect is delivered without any of the gastric lining damage, liver stress or cardiovascular risks associated with chronic NSAID use. Second, it is delivered daily and consistently as part of a dietary pattern rather than intermittently in response to symptoms. Third, chronic low-grade inflammation is not treated with occasional acute doses. It is best addressed with a consistent daily anti-inflammatory signal, which is exactly what daily oleocanthal consumption provides. This matters enormously for body composition and metabolic health because chronic inflammation is one of the primary drivers of insulin resistance, visceral fat accumulation, and the appetite dysregulation that makes weight management so difficult for so many people. Inflammation does not just cause systemic symptoms. It directly interferes with the hormonal signals that regulate hunger, satiety, blood sugar, and fat storage. Addressing inflammation through consistent dietary means is therefore not just about reducing pain or disease risk. It directly affects how your metabolism functions day to day. The PREDIMEND trial is the largest and most credible piece of evidence on this topic, and it deserves careful attention. Spanish researchers followed 447 adults at high cardiovascular risk for several years, dividing them into 3 dietary groups: a Mediterranean diet supplemented with approximately 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil daily, a Mediterranean diet supplemented with mixed nuts, and a low-fat control diet. The olive oil group demonstrated greater reductions in waist circumference than the low-fat group and showed a 30% lower rate of major cardiovascular events, including heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death. The group eating more fat lost more visceral fat than the group eating less fat. This is the opposite of what most people intuitively expect, and it challenges the foundational assumption of most conventional dietary advice. The mechanism behind the waist circumference reduction is not mysterious once you understand how oleocanthal and the polyphenols in extra virgin olive oil affect insulin signaling. A study examining the effect of adding 10 grams of extra virgin olive oil to a meal found that it reduced the post-meal blood sugar spike by over 20% compared to the same meal without olive oil. When blood sugar spikes less dramatically after eating, insulin does not spike as sharply either. When insulin stays lower and more stable throughout the day, the hormonal environment in your body shifts away from fat storage and toward fat burning. This is not a marginal effect. Consistent blood sugar and insulin stability across every meal adds up to a fundamentally different metabolic environment over weeks and months. A more recent study published in Frontiers of Nutrition examined 16,273 adults and found that people who consumed at least 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil at least 6 days per week had an average waist circumference meaningfully lower than people who consumed olive oil irregularly. The regular consumers averaged approximately 89 centimeters, or about 35 inches at the waist, while irregular consumers averaged approximately 99 centimeters, or about 39 inches. A 4-inch difference in waist circumference correlated with nothing more than consistency of olive oil consumption. Waist circumference is one of the most reliable clinical markers for visceral fat, the metabolically active abdominal fat that drives insulin resistance and cardiovascular risk. The research signal here is consistent and meaningful. Beyond blood sugar regulation, extra virgin olive oil consumed before or between meals triggers the release of several satiety hormones through the same pathways that make dietary fat generally more satiating than refined carbohydrates. These include GLP-1, peptide YY, and cholecystokinin, all of which signal fullness and reduce appetite. It is worth being precise about the GLP-1 comparison. Dietary fat stimulation of GLP-1 produces a modest, natural, physiological effect that is fundamentally different in magnitude from pharmaceutical GLP-1 receptor agonists like semaglutide. The mechanism is related, but the scale is not comparable, and presenting them as equivalent would be misleading. What the dietary effect does provide is consistent, gentle appetite regulation without pharmaceutical intervention, which over time can meaningfully reduce overall calorie intake without active calorie restriction. A 2020 study placed 23 people with metabolic syndrome on high oleocanthal extra virgin olive oil for 2 months. Their inflammatory markers including IL-6 and TNF-alpha dropped significantly. Their waist circumference decreased, their visceral fat ratio improved, and their fatty liver index improved. This was a small study, and the findings need replication at larger scale. But the direction of the findings is consistent with the mechanistic evidence, and with the larger observational and interventional literature. There is also emerging evidence on olive oil and diet-induced thermogenesis, which is the number of calories your body burns during the process of digesting and metabolizing food. Some research suggests that extra virgin olive oil may increase diet-induced thermogenesis by several percentage points compared to other dietary fats. This is not a dramatic calorie-burning effect on its own, but combined with the appetite regulation effect and the insulin sensitivity improvement, it contributes to a metabolic environment that is more favorable to fat loss without requiring calorie counting or significant dietary restriction. There is one quality variable that determines whether any of this science applies to the olive oil you are actually using, and it is worth understanding clearly. Oleocanthal and the polyphenols responsible for the metabolic effects described above are present in meaningful concentrations only in fresh, properly stored, genuine extra virgin olive oil. They degrade rapidly after harvest, accelerate in degradation when exposed to light and heat, and are absent or minimal in low-quality, adulterated or oxidized oils. A 2010 study from UC Davis tested 124 bottles of imported extra virgin olive oil sold in California supermarkets and found that a substantial proportion failed international extra virgin standards, with some being diluted with cheaper oils and others being oxidized to the point of being nutritionally counterproductive. It is worth noting that the FDA has pushed back on the methodology and conclusions of that study, and more recent testing has found lower fraud rates than the 2010 numbers suggested. The reality is probably somewhere between those positions. But the practical implication is clear. The label extra virgin on a supermarket shelf is not a guarantee of the polyphenol content that makes the research findings apply to that specific product. The markers of genuine high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil are practical and easy to check. A harvest date should appear on the label, not just a best before date, because polyphenols degrade from the moment of pressing, and the freshness relative to harvest is what matters. The oil should be in a dark glass bottle, since light accelerates oxidation and polyphenol degradation. It should be cold pressed, meaning mechanical pressing without heat that would damage the compounds. And critically, when you taste it straight, it should produce a noticeable peppery burn at the back of the throat. That burn is the oleocanthal activating the same receptors as ibuprofen. No burn means no meaningful oleocanthal. A smooth, mild olive oil that goes down easily is either a low-quality product, an oxidized product, or a blended product, and none of the metabolic benefits described in this video apply to it. Single-origin olive oils, particularly those from Greece, Italy, Spain, and California with verified harvest dates, are generally more reliable sources of genuine high polyphenol content. Early harvest olive oils, pressed from olives picked before full ripening, tend to be higher in polyphenols than late harvest versions. These tend to be more expensive than supermarket bottles, but the difference in polyphenol content between a genuine fresh-pressed early harvest extra virgin olive oil and an oxidized supermarket product can be the difference between a food that actively does what the research describes and one that simply adds calories. The practical protocol that reflects what the research supports is straightforward. 1 tablespoon of high-quality extra virgin olive oil taken on an empty stomach in the morning, with a glass of water. 1 tablespoon in the mid-afternoon between meals. 1 tablespoon in the early evening before dinner. Spacing the doses away from large meals rather than adding them on top of heavy food allows the satiety and blood sugar effects to work without overloading digestion. Adding a large amount of additional fat on top of an already substantial meal slows gastric emptying to a degree that can cause genuine digestive discomfort. The dose and the timing matter as much as the quality of the oil. For people new to consuming olive oil in this way, starting with 1 tablespoon per day for the first week before progressing to 2, and then 3 allows the digestive system to adapt. Some people experience mild gut adjustment in the first few days as the microbiome responds to increased polyphenol exposure, and the gallbladder adapts to processing the additional fat. This is temporary and typically resolves within the first week. What the research does not support is treating 3 tablespoons of olive oil daily as a standalone intervention that overrides a poor overall diet. The predominant findings were in the context of a Mediterranean dietary pattern, not in the context of a standard Western diet with olive oil added on top. The olive oil was part of a framework of vegetables, legumes, fish, whole grains, and limited processed food. The polyphenol and oleocanthal effects are real and meaningful, but they operate most effectively in a dietary environment that is not simultaneously creating large amounts of inflammation, oxidative stress, and insulin disruption through other food choices. The honest summary is this: 3 tablespoons daily of genuine high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil, taken consistently between meals and as part of an overall diet built around whole foods, provides a real research-supported reduction in chronic inflammation, meaningful improvement in post-meal blood sugar regulation, consistent appetite modulation through natural satiety hormone pathways, and a directional improvement in visceral fat over time. These effects are biological, they are mechanistically explained, and they are backed by some of the most credible nutrition research available. None of them are magic and none of them are instant. But applied consistently over weeks and months, they shift the metabolic environment of your body in a direction that makes fat loss, blood sugar stability, and cardiovascular health significantly more achievable. The 1 tablespoon that most people pour over salad twice a week is not getting any of this done. The 3 tablespoons daily of the right oil at the right time is a different thing entirely. This content is for general educational purposes only, and is not a substitute for personalized medical advice. If you have existing health conditions, take medication like cardiovascular or metabolic disease, please consult your healthcare provider before making significant changes to your dietary fat intake.